Hello everyone, iExalt here and I'm back finally with a new video, and this time we'll be talking about a long-lasting franchise that has become so famous and is about to release a new game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, due for release in 2 days. In this video you will be able to see exclusive early access video footage of my own blind playthrough so that you can see for yourself what to expect. I'll be commenting this part with excerpts about the game introduction, the graphics and the controls. To help you make your mind and compare it to its predecessors, I ranked all the main Tomb Raider games, and this video includes number 11 to 6. Tomorrow a new video will be published to complete this one. In the meantime, enjoy. Number 11 would be Tomb Raider Chronicles, aka Tomb Raider 5. I like this game. Everything about it brought me back to my previous playthroughs of previous Tomb Raider games, from the design of certain enemies, like the dog in Roma that is indeed a distant cousin of dogs in Venice, to key characters like Larson, Pierre or Van Croy. A few nice exceptions taken aside, the overall level designs looks too familiar, and that's the real problem. There's nothing standing out visually, even old islands. The truth is, Chronicles gives the impression it was released before the last revelation, and that's probably why it caused me to grow disinterested in the franchise, because the result was somewhat disappointing at the time. The story in Ireland was way too long, which killed the little creativity in this story. With such a labyrinthic structure, you have to be really patient to go through that stage. There are funny elements of course, but that's not enough to save Tomb Raider Chronicles. Level design is way below what we saw in the last revelation, and you can clearly see that there were two different teams, each working on a different game. Fortunately, the franchise has evolved, and Chronicles, though I like the overall idea of the structure, one that is made of different stories, remains void of inspiration, and in many instances, genuine creativity. I like the way the last story wrapped up the mystery of the strange artifact with all seen in Lara's home, the third installment, and I like the music a lot. But this level is also known for its bugs, so even that is not enough. It's not a bad game. I see this as a condensed Tomb Raider game that suffered from high expectations after the last revelation and failed to meet them because the game was released too early and capitalized on what had happened in the previous episode. If we omit the message that pops up when you launch the game for the first time, thereby it was developed by a talented team of people of different genders, religions, ethnicities, and so on and so forth. Shadow of the Tomb Raider has a very colorful introduction, putting you, like often, right in the middle of the action. At least visually, because otherwise the player hasn't got much to do. You don't have any random enemy jumping at you in the first minutes of the game. The opening video shows Lara and Jonah aboard a plane, and the plane tears itself apart and is about to crash when it ends. Yes, that game introduction does ring a bell. They did the same thing in A Survival is Born. But then, like Rise of the Tomb Raider, we go back in time a little, 2 days earlier to be precise. The flashback, though, was unexpected, and I found it quite original. We don't know much about the context at this point, but Lara is stuck, trying to get herself out of some rumbles, lost in the dark, with her leg in really bad shape, and she communicates with Jonah. At this point, you can start controlling Lara, but what you have to do to begin with is not as enticing as the music that comes with it. This flashback is indeed dedicated to learning very basic movements, more basic than in Rise, until Lara finds the crystal and Jonah pops up
and you start running away again with nothing else much to do except moving forwards. The landscapes and music, however, promotes the player's immersion, and Lara definitely looks more confident in herself, less dramatic than in the first episode of the reboot, closer to what we had in Rise of the Tomb Raider. To further improve the immersion, the level in the shadows involves that you mingle with the natives to find information.
You make contact with the High Consul.
Yes, sir. Even after the fiasco in Brazil. No one questions your leadership of the organization.
We've come too far to stop now.
Yes, sir. They're ready for anything.
Jonah, Dominguez is not just the leader of this cell. I think he's the leader of Trinity.
We need to be careful. Laura.
Yeah, I heard you.
The quality of the details taken aside, this is the first time that the level in Tomb Raider has so much life. The adventures of Lara are usually taking place away from civilization.
Where did he go?
Let's keep looking. Any sign of him?
No. Let's keep looking.
Ironically, it is also the most peaceful introduction than in any of the previous games. From a gameplay perspective, it favors immersion, like Underworld, rather than action, like most other Tomb Raider games. But it has this very dark dimension that you only find in a few titles in the Tomb Raider franchise, like Underworld, again, or also like Angel of Darkness. Talking about it, let's go back to our top. Number 10. Tomb Raider, Angel of Darkness. Now here is Chronicles' underestimated little brother, a detective and noir game with some action from time to time. The title has its highlights for sure, but any form of enjoyment is short of being hampered by the gameplay, especially in computers. Beautiful levels and a neat story, ripe with mysteries and a gloomy atmosphere, that's not enough, in my opinion, to make it my favorite Tomb Raider game. It was originally at the bottom of the list, but let's give it some credit. At least for this one, the developers made some genuine effort to produce something truly groundbreaking for the Tomb Raider franchise, and that worked.
And I thought this would be one of my easy days.
The area structure found in the level design can sometimes make your playthrough somewhat unnecessarily lengthy and difficult, but once the pathfinding effort has been done, like previous games, it becomes more enjoyable to proceed through. Unlike Chronicles, it has content, and if it were to be remade one day, it could easily become a fan's favorite. But for now, reality is different, isn't it?
Take it easy. What's going on down here?
Number 9. Tomb Raider, The Survivor is Born. Tomb Raider's second reboot found itself at the 9th position of this stuff. Well, it's Tomb Raider 9 after all. It was good to rediscover Lara Croft. Attempts at making her more human are not new. They were already present in Angel of Darkness. But the problem is, in that game, it is simply not credible. Moreover, the game focuses way too much on action, and that's why it's so short, in spite of all the collectibles you can try to find on your first playthrough. Being ambushed by hordes of enemies is absolutely not what I expect of a Tomb Raider game. A survival is born, yeah, but Tomb Raider games are not just about surviving. So yes, there are caves and tombs to explore, but the puzzle system they use and abuse for every single one of them is amusing to begin with. The point is that exploration is reduced to that weird island where you end up killing Japanese royal soldiers and the zombie Queen Himiko to finish the game, and that was the part of the game I liked the most, to be honest. Because in that game you can't even kill a wolf by yourself. The only wolf you get to kill is a QTE. So yeah, the first part of the game is long, you don't do much except moving forwards, wondering what's that game I'm playing already? Fortunately, the gameplay is fluid. I enjoyed the few platform sections the player has to go through, and the overall game was sort of groundbreaking for the franchise. That's probably the only thing it has. Without Tomb Raider 9, there wouldn't have been any Tomb Raider 10 or whatever. So I'm glad that it came out. The question that ensues would be, have Square Enix, Crystal Dynamics and Eidos learned of their mistakes? Unsurprisingly, Shadow is the most beautiful of all Tomb Raider games. When the second reboot came out, I felt that the game was missing something. Some colorful graphics to say the least. Everything was so dull. From this perspective, it can hardly be denied that Shadow of the Tomb Raider is visually not as dull as A Survivor is Born or Angel of Darkness.
I know this figure. Ishel, the goddess of the full moon. Oh, and this is Shakshel, the new moon. There's an inscription. Shakshel, the key lies beyond her gaze.
Because yes, what players have always liked with the series is the possibility to move around foreign environments and enjoy their specificities. Hence the design of platforms, enemies, or even Lara herself was always changing. Rise of the Tomb Raider had somewhat rectified that by implementing more variations in the landscapes. Which meant that you were evolving in an environment which, from a visual point of view, had much to offer.
There's got to be more to these ruins.
This was all the more evident the two times you confront the witch in the Baba Yaga DLC, which was even more colorful than the main game, giving it a surreal aspect I definitely enjoyed. As you will see whenever you look at the map, Shadow brought the remedy to dullness even further by proposing more colors and more variations in the color and the custom palette they used in the level design.
I've got this. The statue is looking at that cave.
Featuring a jungle level surely helped in that regard. Giving the environment a surreal touch rather than trying to bring down the graphics to fall in line with the trend towards more realism is important in a Tomb Raider game, and not only for immersion. Every single Tomb Raider story, including in the reboot, features supernatural happenings. That's why the color scheme designers use is important, because it may or may not visually translate the supernatural ambience of the game, and when it does, it improves the player immersion. Sometimes it could be a whole level, like the floating islands in Tomb Raider 2 or the reunion in Tomb Raider 3. I really hope they come back to more lively colors, as it was the case at the time. Dull graphics won't help a dull story. Good graphics in conjunction with a well-thought artistic direction, on the other hand, can. Just look at Underworld or Legend. But this was just my opinion. Now, let me tell you why. The legend has it that number 8 is Tomb Raider 7. Now, I like Legend very much, but there are some things that I simply cannot forgive in a Tomb Raider game. If I was globally impressed by the level design and the polished gameplay Legend offers, I simply hated those moments that I think do not belong to such a game. As for Tomb Raider, A Survivor is Born in 2013, for example. Being regularly ambushed by your enemies and shooting at bad guys while driving a motorcycle in Peru could be amusing, but not in the Tomb Raider games and not its so long sequences. In Legends, and that's the problem, action has taken precedence over typical platform gameplay you'd expect of the Tomb Raider franchise. The same rule of thumb applies to the various and numerous quick-time events you find in that game. But it would be unfair not to admit that Legend was more than just that. It was a rebirth. It reintroduced Lara's home. It reintroduced secrets and brought us players through many areas throughout the world, some more interesting than others. Graphics are quite good actually, even for 2006, but that's it. Yes, you have puzzles and traps, but so did you in the first Tomb Raider installment, and that one had a better story. Talking about it. Number 7, Tomb Raider, the game that got me acquainted with the franchise. It's hard to rank all those games and not pay tribute to the first one, because in France we got our games a little bit later than the rest of the world. I remember my brother used to play it while Tomb Raider 2 was coming out. Must have been something like 7 or 8 years old, and those dinosaurs in the Lost Valley scared the crap out of me. But I liked what I saw. I liked the ideas the game had been based on: exploration, discoveries, an environment where you can move freely, and mythology. Of course, I finished the game when I was older, but only after I played the 3 ones that came after it. The game is really good, but level design is too repetitive and the environment is always enclosed. You never get to see a sunlit blue sky as you do in Tomb Raider 2, and some puzzles are difficult only because level design is not always very intuitive. Unfinished Business is a nice addition, but I would have preferred the order of the levels was coherent with the first entry of this formidable franchise. By the way, to illustrate this classic game, I used pictures of Tomb Raider's 1 extension and official image because my computer could not have the game work properly. Unfinished Business is a nice addition to Tomb Raider, but the levels could have been directly implemented into the game, especially that moment when you get into the hive and detonate everything. That's so cool, and the atmosphere feels so unique. If you haven't already, try it, and at least do it for sport. Lara was more fluid in Rise than she ever was in any Tomb Raider games. Comparably to Underworld, it made action moments like combat more enjoyable. At the time though, the big issue had been the camera. They fixed that in A Survivor is Born, but because Lara was no longer the tough girl she had become in Underworld, I found her less fluid to control, which made combat very messy. And for a game that relies that much on combat, with hordes of enemies coming at you in successive waves, that was ridiculous. They did it better in Rise. Combat was as enjoyable to play as platform stages, because they introduced a lot of new possibilities. You really felt that Lara could go anywhere, or almost. she sometimes had different options to move from one point to the next. The game felt less linear than its predecessor. Like Rise of the Tomb Raider, Shadow reintroduced swimming and diving, except this time the underwater design makes it easier to move around, and you can even get across the way of some fish in the water, like the famous piranhas in Tomb Raider 3. It's nice for the gaming environment as well as from a gameplay perspective because they act like an obstacle, either to prevent you from crossing the map too quickly or to prevent you from going forward in the action, as was the case in Tomb Raider 3. Like Rise of the Tomb Raider, Lara therefore starts with most of the abilities she developed in the previous game, like using a rope when climbing down or roaming underwater for long periods of time. It creates the sense of continuity we expect of a trilogy. She also obtains new abilities, giving you multiple choices to get rid of your enemies. But since it is difficult to talk about the controls without mentioning the gameplay, I'll dedicate a special section to the gameplay in my next video. As of now, let's continue with our top. Number 6 would be Tomb Raider Underworld, aka Tomb Raider 8. I liked almost everything I saw in Underworld, and still something annoys me. From the beginning of the game to its very end, it is hard not to enjoy the beauty of the environment Lara wades through and the fluid gameplay Underworld has. But, and that's a big one, it is way too easy and way too short. The fact that Legend was short was understandable because it was the first time Crystal Dynamics developed a Tomb Raider game, but after our anniversary, the fact that Underworld lacks some texture is not understandable, and by texture I mean life. The game is beautiful, but it looks uninspired and empty. Thailand is probably the only exception there. Underworld cannot go high on my list for the simple reason that there is something missing. Everything is way too linear, though the game perfectly alternates between puzzles and action. Lara's hints were a nice addition, and so was the sauna. Though I usually like to linger a little bit, these help you make sure you're following the right direction and gives you information about the map whenever the camera wouldn't cooperate. It's a nice game, fun to replay if you like large puzzle rooms, and not as fast-paced as Legend. There is no QTE I can remind myself of, and that's good. The game and novel should have been expanded a little bit, and the story should have been more tightly written for Underworld to really shine. But still, it's fun, and all these secrets will keep yourself going for sure.